But we're just going to go ahead and log into Authentik, log in with Google, which we've already done before. So we should be able to just go right to it, connecting to Authentik. And look, we have access to Immich right there. And let's try to log in with Google. And there we go. In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up identity providers for Pangolin. So specifically, I'm going to show you how to set up Authentik. And then I'm also going to show you how to configure Google as an identity provider to Authentik. And we'll use that same Google app that we create to use it as an identity provider directly in Pangolin. Now, there's a lot of benefits to using identity providers for setting into Pangolin. It actually just makes it a lot easier for your users to authenticate themselves and get into their Pangolin resources. And having Pangolin users in general just make it really easy to manage their roles and what resources they have access to. And setting up something like Authentik is also beneficial because you can configure that same Authentik instance to sign into other applications such as Immich. So I'll show you how to set up Immich with Authentik probably in the next video. And I'm also going to show you how to configure webhooks from Authentik to be able to whitelist your user IP addresses for resources like Jellyfin. That way you can still kind of accomplish zero trust with a resource like Jellyfin that didn't really have any other types of SSO layer bypass. So I'll show you how to do that in a later video. But in this video, we're doing identity providers, so let's go ahead and get into it. Now guys, the first thing I'm going to do is actually set up Authentik. So what we need to do is create a local resource on our Pangolin server, and then create a domain and DNS record that'll point a URL to that Authentik resource. So we need to do that before we can actually set up an identity provider. So let's just do a search for Authentik Docker Compose. Should take us to the Authentik documentation here, and we have a wget command to get a compose file. So let's go ahead and copy this command, and you can SSH into your server. I like to use VS Code. I've explained this in multiple videos, but use the SSH Remote Explorer extension you can get from the extensions, and then you can just SSH right into your server, and then you can see the folder structure at the folder that you are pointing at. So I'm in my Docker folder, which is inside of my users home folder, my Ubuntu home folder. So we're in Docker. Let's go ahead and make a directory for Authentik where we're going to put our Docker Compose file, and then we can run that wget command. So let's cd into Authentik and paste that command in there. So now we have the Docker Compose file. Okay, and then the next thing we need to do is copy this command to generate a password and secret key and write them into a .env file. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. And now we have a .env that has a password and Authentik secret key. Now, while you're here, if you do have a SMTP email service set up, which in general, it's good to have. I have a video on how to do this with AWS SES to easily send emails from any of your services. There are environmental variables to do that at this email configuration link. So just to show you that, you can add these variables to your .env now or later, but just an easy way to get an email notification for when someone successfully signs into Authentik. That's an easy way to do it. I will have a video on how to get notifications from Authentik straight to Godify, so make sure you tune into that because I have really beautifully formatted notifications from Authentik to Godify that I just absolutely love, way more than these email notifications. The only other thing I'll mention are the overrides for the HTTP and HTTPS ports. You technically only really need to use one of these, but just note that the default is 9000 and 9443, and these are pretty commonly used. Portainer, for example, like if you're already running Portainer, then I believe that is defaulting to 9443. So just keep that in mind. I'm probably just going to use the defaults here and then route Pangolin to either HTTP or HTTPS. So So we can see that port mapping right here. These are the environmental variables. By default, it's binding the HTTP and HTTPS. In any case, Pangolin can terminate HTTPS, of course, and you can route to the HTTP. So you can comment one of these out if you don't want to have one of them exposed that you're not actually using. So if you wanted to comment out the HTTPS port, you could. And of course, Pangolin is terminating HTTPS. So just like most resources, you are just routing your proxy via HTTP. No self-sign cert by the application. So we can just do that. That's fine. I'll route to 9000. Let's go ahead and save this. And then let's go ahead and do a sudo docker compose upd. Let that pull the authentic image. Okay, so that should be up. Before we start routing DNS records, let's just do a quick check of the logs. So logs, authentic. And I didn't actually set a container name, which I usually like to do. So for the future, let's do a container name and call it authentic. Okay, so let's go and check the logs to make sure there's no error that happened. Sudo docker logs, authentic. Note that I added a container name here for the server. A little bit more friendly. And we have all info level logs, so no errors. So that actually looks good. Okay, now even though that this is up and running with the port binded on to the host, it does just make it a lot easier to map a resource to this application if we put it on the same network as our Pangolin stack. So if you go to your Pangolin Docker Compose, you should see that you have a network called Pangolin. So we're going to add each of our authentic containers to that network. And to do that, what I'm just going to do is go ahead and just put each of these containers into that Pangolin network, just like that. So let's do the same thing with the server, and I'll do the same thing with the worker, just to kind of keep it consistent. And then we'll add a networks block and define that the Pangolin network is an external network. So now let's go ahead and take this down and take it back up, just so that it's on that same network. Sudo docker compose down, and then we'll do a sudo docker compose upd. Now I want to go ahead and create a DNS record that points to our server for our authentic domain. And I want to go ahead and do this now before I start creating a resource, so that the DNS records take effect and we're able to pull SSL certs so that our HTTPS works. So I'm going to hop over to Cloudflare, which is my DNS provider. I'll go ahead and log in here. I'm going to click on my domain here, Thomas Wild Tech, and head to DNS records. Now I've already created an auth record here, but just to make sure it's clear how we do this, we want to create a record. It's an A record. You can call the subdomain whatever you want. I like auth. Turn off the Cloudflare proxy. We're not using Cloudflare proxy. And then we're going to use the IP address of our server. I'm using an Oracle free tier server. If you don't know how to set up a free VPS on Oracle, check out the link in the description. And then I'm going to hit save. So now that we have that DNS record set up, let's go ahead and make sure that we have a local site created. Now, generally when you create a site in Pangolin, you're using a tunnel, right? You're using the Newt tunnel to access resources on your self-hosted server. But in this case, we're just adding, we need a local site. That means the site of the VPS. So we can call this VPS, we can call it local, whatever you want to call it. Actually, I'll stick with local since that's kind of how it's being defined. Local resources only, no tunneling. And then go ahead and hit save. Now we can create a resource for Authentik. So let's go to resource. I'll call it Authentik HTTPS resource. And then we're going to use that same auth subdomain. And then we can add a target here. Now make sure you use the local site that you just created. And then you can do HTTP if you navigate to that HTTP port, or HTTPS if you navigate to the HTTPS port. Now I think I just stuck with the HTTP. So that was port 9000. And so here, because we put our Authentik application in the same network, we can actually just refer to it by the container name. Now remember, I specified that to be Authentik, and then we're going to go to the port 9000. And that's the internal port. That's not even the port that's being mapped to the host. So that is the HTTP, and we're going to go with enabled, and then we'll hit create resource. Now, first thing you do to make sure you don't get into some weird authentication loop is that this particular resource should not be protected by platform SSO. It is a authentication resource. Its purpose is to be used as an identity provider. So we don't want it to be behind SSO. So very important there. Otherwise, you will try to get yourself into the auth domain and then get this authentication loop going. So with that said, let's go ahead and click our domain here, try it out, and we are here. Okay, so we need to get to the actual initial URL. Oh, and just to say, if for whatever reason you get like some kind of cert error, you know, it says like someone might be trying to steal your information or something like that, that just means that traffic is actually using its own self-signed certificate because it hasn't pulled a cert yet. So if that's the case, just take your Pangolin stack down and take it back up, and that'll just force traffic to go ahead and pull a cert, assuming you're not using the wildcard cert setup for Pangolin. I'm gonna do a quick search for the Authentik setup URL, and I'll just use the Brave response here because this looks correct. So the very first time you're setting up Authentik, you need to come in here and go to this URI here. Make sure I have that right. Take out the extra slash. And then we have our initial setup. So provide a admin email and password and continue. And congratulations, you now have Authentik configured as a local site. So the next step is to actually configure this as an identity provider for Pangolin. I'm just going to hop over to the Authentik documentation, and I'll just do a search for Pangolin and just go to Pangolin configuration. So that's pretty nice. So the preparation is exactly what we did. We have a domain for our Pangolin instance itself. They're using pangolin.company. And then we also have our Authentik domain, which is authentic.company in their documentation. So just keep in mind, that's whatever your URL is. So the first thing that we'll do is go to the admin interface, or you can hit the create a new application here. Just go ahead and hop over to the admin interface and open up the menu, go to applications, and then we'll do create with provider. So for the application, we're just going to call this Pangolin. That is what we're setting up. We're setting up an OAuth application for identity providing to Pangolin. So that's why it's a Pangolin application. The provider is OAuth, OpenID. Click next. Select an authorization flow. I do the explicit consent. Okay, and then it says note the client ID and client secret because you're going to need these later. So I'll just go ahead and copy and paste these into a text editor for now. Let's just go ahead and select that, and I'll write client ID. And let's go ahead and view this guy and paste that. Okay, so we can temporarily set a redirect URI, or I don't think you even need to set this yet. Pangolin will tell us what that redirect URI is, so we can just come back. But if you want to go ahead and create that placeholder, you can do that. Okay, but otherwise, that's pretty much all we need to do for now. So we're just going to go ahead and hit next, and then we don't need any kind of binding, and then we can hit submit. Okay, so go ahead and close that. We now have our Pangolin application. We do need to go to Pangolin now, the dashboard, so that we can set up the identity provider. So we go to the server admin page, hop over to identity providers, and we're going to add an identity provider. So we can just go and call this Authentik. And I haven't really talked about provisioning users yet, but what this means is if someone is to sign in with the identity provider and there's no Pangolin user for that person, do we want to auto provision them into a new Pangolin user with a Pangolin role mapping so that they can access whatever resources they're supposed to have access to. So generally when you're using Authentik, you have already provisioned them in the Authentik application. You've already created a user account and set what role they should have. So for Authentik, we want this to be checked. Now, when I show you how to set up Google directly as an identity provider, are not going to want that to be set. We want to have already created the user in Pangolin and then do a mapping. That way, not some random person can't just sign into Pangolin and get the default role. So for Authentik, we're using Autoprovision, and now we can go ahead and paste that client ID that we copied over. We can paste the client secret that we copied over, and then we can get that authorization URL. So they list it right here. You can also find this URL inside of Authentik. It'll give it to you for the provider that you set up. So if you go to the main menu and go to Applications Providers, go ahead and click on that provider that we created, and you will see the authorization URL as well as the token URL. So you can see that that's the same as the URL that they're providing in the instructions, except this has our full domain in it. Let's go ahead and copy that as the authorization URL. And then we can go ahead and copy the token URL. And then there's a reminder here, after creating the identity provider, you will need to configure the callback URL. So after we create this, it's going to give us the callback. Now we can keep the token configuration, the default here, don't need to make any changes. When I configured Google directly, I will make a change to the identifier path because we're going to have to do some kind of mapping without knowing what the Google UUID is, but we don't have to worry about that for Authentik because we can configure the payload from Authentik to have a certain role mapping and organization mapping. So let's go ahead and hit create identity provider. And now we have a redirect URL. So let's go and copy that. And we can go to the provider here and you can see the redirect URIs. There are none. Let's go ahead and click edit and we can add a valid redirect URL and go ahead and paste that in there. So also you might just want to keep in mind this identity provider primary key value. You can see that this is 3. If this is the first time you're setting up an identity provider, it would be 1. Just keep that in mind. So this is number 3 for me. Go ahead and hit update. Okay, so now we're configured, but the only thing that we have done is actually telling Pangolin how we map a Authentik user to a Pangolin user. So let's go back over to Pangolin and we're going to check out the organization policies. And before I do this real quick, I want to show you what the payload actually looks like from Authentik. So if we go to that provider and click on preview, this is the information that Authentik is sending to Pangolin. And notice the groups here. So my user is a member of the Authentik admins group. It's the only group that it's a member of. But this is really important for when we configure users in Authentik for how we actually map them when they are auto provisioned, right? So here's what we have to consider with a organization policy is that there is an organization mapping and there's a role mapping. So organization mapping might seem a little confusing when you only have one organization, but technically you can have multiple organizations. And when someone signs into Pangolin, it needs to know how it maps to that organization. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a group in Authentik for an organization, even though I only have one. But that just kind of future-proofs your setup. And then I'm also going to create groups for certain roles that I want to have for my Pangolin resources. Let's go to directory and let's go to groups. So we have our admins group. I'm going to go ahead and create a new group and I'm just going to just call it Pangolin. I'll just call it Pangolin because I only have one Pangolin organization and I don't want this to get like too confusing with organization names. But so we're going to create a Pangolin group, and then now I'm going to go ahead and preemptively create some groups that I want to do some role matching to Pangolin. So let's say that I want a group for family members. So these are people that I probably want to give access to Immich, for example. And then maybe let's create a group for media. So maybe some people that I want to be able to, whitelist their IPs for Jellyfin, for example, or maybe, Navidrome or what have you. So we have media, and then let's go ahead and just go with a default member that, by default isn't really going to have access to any applications, or maybe just some certain basic applications that we're hosting on Pangolin. Go ahead and create that. And then I'm going to go to my Pangolin group and go to users. And then let's go ahead and just add our Authentik admin user, myself. Just going to go ahead and add that to the Pangolin group. Now, if I hop back over to providers and go to my Pangolin provider, you can see how that updated that group's parameter. So now it was always an array, right? But now I have the admins and the Pangolin. So this is going to be kind of important because I'm going to use that as a rule for actually mapping to my organization. So let's go ahead and add that organization policy. I'm going to select my organization. And then first, let's do the organization mapping path. Okay, and then on my blog site here, I'll link this too. I'm just going to go ahead and copy a couple things here for this tutorial. But this is using like a JMIS expression. That's how you actually call it. But what we do is basically just say, hey, return true if the groups parameter in the JSON payload, that groups parameter contains Pangolin, then let's map it to our organization. So I have Jellyfin here, but you should have like a more organization friendly name for that. So I'll paste that, and then this is going to be Pangolin. So I'm basically saying like, I'm going to have to force myself to put every Authentik user into the Pangolin group. And then for the role mapping, the way I like to kind of do this is just with different if statements. So essentially, if the groups contains Authentik admins, so that's this guy, Authentik admins, then we're going to map that to the admin group or role in Pangolin, I should say. Else, if we contain family, then go to family. Else, they're just going to automatically get mapped to the member group. So keep that in mind. We also need to actually create these roles in Pangolin, which we haven't done yet. So let's go ahead and do that. And if, I created that media group, so I would just add another line for media. So here, go ahead and just paste that in there. I know it's a little kind of long, and there might be a better way to do this. I'm not like a JMIS expression expert, but this kind of just works in terms of a if, else if, and then else statement. So let's go ahead and just add that policy for that. That way I can just show you how when I sign in, I'm going to be essentially creating a new user for myself with the Authentik identity provider, and I should get the admin role. And then I'll create another person in Authentik and like for like a family member, and we can see how they get auto provisioned. Okay, and so before I sign in, let me just go ahead and do that. Let me create a new role for these other things. So go to my organization, go to roles. What do you know? I actually already have that family role. We can do the same thing with that media role. Just call it media and access to Jellyfin, Navidrome. Go ahead and do that. Check my users. Okay, so I only have my my own internal user here. I haven't auto provisioned an Authentik user yet. So let's go ahead and do that and sign out, log out. And now we have our identity provider here, Authentik. So let's click on that. And I'm already logged into Authentik, so I have an Authentik session. Shouldn't make me sign in here. Go ahead and just hit continue. And validating identity, and now I am in. Now, I created myself with the admin role, not the owner role. So I don't actually have those owner settings, but I can go to the access control and I can look at users. And now I can see that I have two different users, one for each identity provider. So this is how it works with Pangolin. You don't have a single user with multiple identity providers. Every user is a unique combination of a username and an identity provider. Okay, but let's see what this looks like for a family member. So let's go to users and let's create a new user here. And we'll just say this is Tim, display name. Do Tim, email address. Let's go ahead and give him an email address because that's how Pangolin is going to view that username with the email address. Otherwise, it's going to just use the whole sub field, which is like this long unique ID. So give him tim@thomaswildtech.com active, and we'll go and create that user. Okay, and then I can either go to the user or go to groups and then add him to the Pangolin group. So let's just go to the user. And then I can look at the groups that he's in, add to existing group. And we're gonna add Tim to family. Oh, the other thing I'm gonna do is give Tim a password. So let's go to overview and hit set password. Just give him a password of Tim. Not a great password by any means, but that's just gonna make it really easy. We need to also add him to Pangolin. So let's hit the add to existing group and click on Pangolin. That way he does get mapped to the organization. So family and Pangolin. And let's go ahead and sign out here. And then let's also sign out here. And then let's do continue with Authentik. Hopefully I'm not signed in. Yep. So we're going to enter Tim, the username, and enter Tim, the password. And Tim is a family member. So family member is in, and the family permission has access to Immich, which I already configured. So that's great. Tim is in. Tim can use Authentik to sign in, and he's auto provisioned with the family role. Let's just go ahead and verify that by signing out. So we're gonna log out. I'm gonna log back in as the owner's account so that I get that server admin up here, and then go to users, and you can see Tim is there. Next thing I'm going to show you is how to create a Google Cloud project so that we can have Google as an identity provider for Authentik. And then I'll also show you how to set up Google as an identity provider for Pangolin itself. So search for Google Cloud Console. Yeah. So console.cloud.google.com, then click on select a project and go to new project. And I'll call this Pangolin tutorial. And we have no organization here. So we're just going to go ahead and hit create. Okay, so now we're in there. Click on the menu here and let's go over to APIs and services. And we'll go to OAuth consent screen and then credentials. So OAuth consent screen, and then let's just click on the get started button here and give this an app name. So call it the same thing. App name might be like Pangolin or your organization. So I'll call it Thomas Wild Tech, should be fine. And then user support email is just my Gmail account that I have here. Hit next. The audience is external. We're not using Google Workspace or anything like that. So click next, and then contact information. This can be any email address, thomas@thomaswildtech.com, and click next and agree to the policy. And if you're curious what that user data policy is, basically just says that you need to be transparent about what information you are accessing from the user signing in with Google. You can't be deceptive, etc. So with that said, let's go ahead and hit continue and create. Okay, and then let's go and create an OAuth client. I can do it right here. I can also do it from the API and services menu, and then the credentials right there. Let's go ahead and just hit create OAuth client, and we're going to select a web application, and you can call this Authentik or Pangolin. I'll just call it Pangolin, and then we'll need the redirect URIs right here. So this is really similar to, setting it up like we did with Authentik to Pangolin. So we'll come back for the redirect URI and just go ahead and hit create, and then we're going to note our client ID and secret. Okay, so it gave us the client ID didn't give us the secret. I'll just go and click OK. I'll get it from the client section. So let's click on that, Pangolin. So we have our client ID and client secret right here. So let's just add that to the same text file here. Google client ID, client secret. So let's get this whole guy and paste that, and then get the client secret, copy that, and we'll paste that. Okay, and then let's hop over to Authentik, sign back in with our credentials as an admin. Let's go to the admin interface, then go to directory and then federation and social login. We're going to do a create and go to, see, we have various different places. You know, I'm just doing Google in this tutorial because it's probably the most common identity provider. I'll just call this Google. And then the user matching, we're going to do it based on email. Link to a user with identical email address. So it can have security implications when the source doesn't validate the user. I think just in general with Google, we can trust that someone signing in with Google, that their email address has already been validated on their device that they're signing in from. So we're going to link to the user with identical email address. And then otherwise, I mean, I don't know how much I can actually customize the payload from Google. So we're just going to link it to the user. The user has its own, you know, groups assigned to it. So the client ID, client secret, go ahead and get that. Client ID, client secret. The scopes are going to be open ID, email, and profile, and then click finish. Okay, and so now if we actually go to Google here, click that, we'll see what the callback URL is. So we're going to copy this guy, and we're going to come to the authorized redirect URLs, and we're going to paste that right there. And then we're going to save that. Okay. And now what we want to do is make sure that Google is available as a sign-in option. So we're going to go to flows and stages and go to flows, go to the default authentication flow and go to stage bindings. And then for the default authentication identification, go to edit stage and go to source settings. And now we can add Google as a source for logging in. And I think it's good to show the source's labels so that it actually says Google, and then we can hit update. Okay, and we should go ahead and create a user with a Gmail. And I'm gonna have to use my own Gmail so that I can use my phone to confirm the OAuth access. So let's go to users. We'll do new user. Now I'll just actually call my username Thomas, display name. I'll just give it a display name of Thomas Google. So this is the important part. You need to actually put my Gmail here and create that user. Okay, and then let's just go ahead and make sure he is added to both groups or any group. Oh, he needs to be in the Pangolin group at minimum. Let's go to Pangolin and we'll just say that he is we'll just go ahead and say family. So we're gonna save that. Okay, so let's see if this Thomas person can sign into Authentik and get access into Pangolin as a family member. So we'll go ahead and sign out. And now we have the login with Google option. So let's try it out. Go and choose an account. So it says what my platform app has access to, which is name and profile, email address. Click on continue. Okay, so I am able to sign in as myself here, which is great, but we just signed right into Authentik. So let's actually try signing into Pangolin. Okay, so let's try this. We're signed out of Authentik. We're going to come over here, log out of Pangolin. We're gonna log into Pangolin directly. Normally you would just set a resource. You just give someone a resource domain probably, but we're just going to go ahead and log into Authentik, log in with Google, which we've already done before. So we should be able to just go right to it, connecting to Authentik. And look, we have access to Immich right there. Let's go ahead and sign back out and sign back in as the owner. If I go to users, I can now see my Gmail here. That person is now a family member. I also do want to just mention that if you want someone to automatically get directed to Authentik, and it kind of just depends on the resource and what other kind of access rules you have. Immich, for example, like I might want to provide an easy way for like a cousin to access it, in which case I wouldn't really want to automatically redirect to the identity provider, because I might want to actually use like an email whitelist so that they can get a one-time password, OTP, or just have a PIN that like my whole extended family can use. But just want you to be aware that if you do the auto login, then if you try to go to the Immich domain and you haven't been authenticated through the SSO layer, then it will just automatically redirect you to the Authentik webpage where you can just easily click, sign in with Google or whatever. That way you don't hit the Pangolin site first and you might be confused with all the various ways that you can sign in. Okay, so lastly, while we're at it, we've already created our Google Cloud Platform. Let's go ahead and just show you how to add Google as an identity provider for Pangolin directly. So head back to the admin settings, go to identity providers. We're going to add another identity provider. We're going to call this Google. And we do not want to auto provision users. We are going to do our own mapping based on email address here. So all of this information I can get straight from Authentik. The authorization URL and token URL is specific to Google. Should also be able to find that information in here somewhere, but we can also just get it from Authentik. So let's sign back in, and I'll just go to the admin interface and head back over to the Federation and social login. Click on Google, and you can see the authorization URL. This is just specific to Google, as same with the token URL. Let's grab that. Authorization URL is always going to be the accounts.google.com, OAuth, auth, and the token URL is always going to be this for Google. Client ID and secret, we copied that from our Google Cloud project, client secret. Okay, and then the only thing here is that I'm going to actually change the identifier to be email instead of sub, because when I create a Pangolin user, there's just no way for me to know what the sub value is going to be coming from Google. You get this long UUID. So what I can do is change it to email, and that way I can make the identifier for my Pangolin user be an email address. Okay, and then let's try going back to organization and then users, and then let's try to create a user with Google. So we're provisioning our users manually here. Don't want anyone to just be able to sign in. And then the username is the identifier that's coming back from Google. So this is actually going to be my Gmail. And then my email can be the same, obviously. Name, I'll call this Thomas Wild Google, just to make it clear. And then I'll also give it a role of member, just to change it up. Create that user. So now I just manually provisioned a Google user into Pangolin, and we're just mapping it based on that sub. Let's go ahead and see what happens. Let's see what happens when I log out. And then we're going to choose Google this time. Okay, and I forgot to add a redirect URI. So whoops, let's go ahead and make sure we do that into our Google project. Sign back in, go to admin, identity providers, go to Google, and then we need to get this redirect URL. So we need to include this as a valid redirect URI here and paste that in there and go ahead and save. Okay, so it could take up to 5 minutes. So let's try that again now. Let's go ahead and log out, and let's try to log in with Google. And there we go. Member does not have any resources available, but I am logged in with my Gmail and Google as the identity provider. So guys, that's how we add identity providers to Pangolin and Authentik. We set up Authentik for Pangolin, and we set up Google for Authentik and for Pangolin. Just remember that every unique combination has its own Pangolin user. Every combination of a identity provider and a unique identifier, whether that's the UUID or an email. So just keep that in mind, because if you're providing multiple identity providers, that can be a little strange for actually managing multiple users that really represent the same user. That's why, like, if you really want to have Google, for example, I would still just use Authentik and have Google as one of the identity providers. That way you can have multiple identity providers in Authentik and still just have one identity provider for Pangolin. So that's typically how I like to set that up. I kind of wish Pangolin just had a single user and then had multiple identity providers for that user, because I just feel like it ends up being a little confusing when you have multiple Pangolin users represent one user, just that if you're supporting multiple identity providers. So stick around for my upcoming videos. I'll show you how to do some really cool webhooks stuff with Authentik so that we can whitelist IP addresses for Jellyfin. That way we can still protect Jellyfin with SSO, which a lot of people don't do. So I definitely think you should be doing SSO for Jellyfin. And I'll show you how to sign into Immich with Authentik. Super simple now that we have Authentik set up. So stick around and I'll see you soon.